And imagine the United Kingdom, which created the Industrial Revolution in part because it's built on an island of coal. Imagine that same United Kingdom banishing industry for some cultish thing. And I don't put this all on Labour. Boris Johnson was some insane cult member of net zero himself.
My first question is very basic. Should the UK scrap net zero?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, net zero doesn't make any sense even on its own terms. Even if the UK were to remove every car from the road, remove all carbon-based fuels from its energy source, if it were to stop farming, if it were to ban farting cows, the resulting zero emissions would not change the weather one jot. China builds more coal-fired power plants than the rest of the world combined. I mean, it's purely a performative act politically, and it's such an act of crony capitalism. There are no investors in the world for green energy without government subsidies. It's all a scheme and a scam. And a country needs plentiful, affordable food, plentiful, affordable energy. Net zero is an attack on both. And I see the news that the last virgin steel blast furnaces in the UK are in jeopardy of being shut down because some politicians think you can make steel without using coal. You can't. You can't. And imagine the United Kingdom, which created the Industrial Revolution in part because it's built on an island of coal. Imagine that same United Kingdom banishing industry for some cultish thing. And I don't put this all on Labour. Boris Johnson was some insane cult member of net zero himself. So the Tories are just as bad.
Now, of course, they claim that by reducing carbon emissions, we're making an impact on fighting climate change, and that Britain can lead the world and show an example to other countries of how to cut carbon emissions, which is leading to global warming. What do you say to this argument that we have to do it to show the world, to lead the world in our fight against climate change, and that Britain can also be what they call a green energy superpower?
The United Nations itself has something called the Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is the group that meets every year. They call it COP, Conference of the Parties. They were in Glasgow a few years ago. It's this annual reunion of diplomats, bureaucrats, and lobbyists and politicians. But they're the experts. And in some ways they really are. I mean, they're very political, but they are the experts. And they have done studies themselves that show that even if every one of their recommended tools is implemented fully, the hardest, toughest application of their carbon reduction schemes, it will not stop inexorable natural global warming. The globe is warming very, very slightly. And anyone who has heard of the ice ages and knows that we're emerging from one for about the last 10,000 years, knows that the Earth is very, very slowly warming. And while human activity may very, very slightly accelerate that, if you were to wipe out all human endeavor completely, you would not stop global warming. You would slow it down by an imperceptible amount. So the language you use there, combat climate change, fight against climate change, look at what the center of that phrase is. It's the verb. It's the action. Are you combating climate change? Are you denouncing climate change? It's not are you actually changing the weather, but are you doing the performance? Because even the UN itself acknowledges that none of this will actually change the weather. It's insane to think that another tax will change the weather. A 15-minute city will change the weather. A ULEZ will change the weather. It's not. So you're the way you use the language is how the net zero proponents use it. Are you combating climate change? Not are you changing the climate, but are you putting up a good show and paying all the different relevant lobby groups? It's shocking to me that the UK will deindustrialize. And Germany, just as bad. They just detonated in Hamburg. They had a brand new coal-fired power plant, the cleanest technology. It's only 6 years old. 3 billion euros they paid for it. They just detonated it. And all this butch talk from Germany and other European countries about remilitarizing. Good luck doing that without electricity, without power, without coal, without steel. I mean, I think Europe has had a holiday from history, and so it's indulged these luxury Western beliefs of net zero. China doesn't waste time with that luxury belief. They're too busy building aircraft carriers out of steel. And Russia loves it. Russia loves when the West cuts off its own energy because that's its chief weapon in the war in Ukraine. Russia gets massive amounts of money from Germany and other European countries because they buy its oil and gas.
One of the great enemies of Labour, and you're right, the Conservatives who support net zero, is oil and gas. And in Britain we have North Sea oil and gas fields. New data that came out recently suggests that 180 of the 280 oil and gas fields that Britain currently has active will be shut down by 2030. Labour have instigated or are keeping a windfall tax on oil and gas. They're also refusing to allow new licenses to build new pipelines and new drilling in the North Sea. What do you think of this kind of perspective on oil and gas as being the most evil thing a country can produce?
Well, it's not. In fact, there's a direct correlation between fossil fuel use and longevity and prosperity and human happiness. The number one correlation with life expectancy country by country is fossil fuels. Bjorn Lomborg and Alex Epstein, who wrote The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. They're excellent on this. Without energy, we're at the mercy of the elements. Much more people die, for example, of cold than of heat. So we need natural gas to keep warm. Every single thing that we eat comes to us from a truck that came from a farm that used tractors. I mean, it's madness in the West that we tax carbon, but I'm sure you followed the farmers' rebellion in the Netherlands, where they have a war against nitrogen as well. It's sheer madness to have a war against a naturally occurring element of the periodic table. When I first heard from Geert Wilders, the Dutch politician, about the government's obsession with nitrogen, I laughed. I thought, nitrogen, what's that bad? Well, how's that any more insane than our obsession with carbon? All life depends on carbon. We're made of carbon. Everything we eat is made of carbon. Without carbon dioxide, aka plant food, life on Earth would I'm emitting carbon right now talking to you at 30,000 parts per million. The problem is this whole fake scholarship, this whole fake field of endeavor called combating climate has grown up. And smart people, including some smart people on the right, said, oh, I'm a better technocrat than they are. I'm a better figure-outer than them. It's like Elon Musk says, not everything needs to be improved. Some things should be abolished or abandoned altogether. We don't need better climate action. We need no climate action. Because climate action, like I say, is just a performance. You shut down British energy, one of two things happens. The energy poverty actually reduces how people live. They can't get the food they want. They live a colder winter, or more likely, people will just import energy from other countries. And I can assure you, Vladimir Putin will be very happy to supply Britain's energy needs after the Ukraine war is over. And even if it doesn't, it'll supply those of other countries who have no compunction with buying oil and gas from Russia. What kind of madness would turn one's own citizens into energy poverty? That's one of the huge advantages the United States has over other countries is the low cost of energy. From an industrial point of view, that's certainly true. all the heavy industries are moving out of the UK because they just can't afford the electricity.
Well, Britain has the highest energy costs in the G7. I know you're based in Canada, and you mentioned this would just lead to importing energy from other countries. Britain has imported a lot of natural gas from Qatar and from the Middle East to supplement its energy when we could be drilling it or pumping it from shale gas or from the North Sea. So it seems crazy from that perspective. But tell us about Canada. Has Canada adopted similar policies to the UK?
It's certainly trying to. I mean, we hear about net zero, and our new Prime Minister is named Mark Carney. He spent some time in the UK as the Greta Thunberg following chair of the Bank of England. And his whole thing is to co-chair something called GFANS, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Glasgow, again, referring to one of these UN climate gatherings. So he is a net zero fanatic. And it'll be devastating if he wins his election on April 28th, because he will surely implement that in Canada. Canada is one of the world's larger producers of oil. And so there's a tension in the country, because oil is what's making us rich, but oil is what these progressives hate. Justin Trudeau blocked a number of pipelines that would have taken that oil not just to the United States but to the open oceans. And there was a dream that Canadian ethical oil, as I dubbed it in my book a decade ago, could supplant OPEC conflict oil. I mean, here's what I would say to anyone, whether you're in Canada, the United States, the UK, or anywhere else. Well, you mentioned the UK brings in its gas from Qatar. That's an OPEC theocratic dictatorship. In my book, Ethical Oil, I took a liberal look at oil sands oil, or other sources of ethical oil like the North Sea or fracking. And I said, what do liberals claim to care about when it comes to energy? I think four things. They want it to be environmentally responsible. They want it to be peaceful, not just the production of it, but the use of the proceeds. They want workers to be well compensated, and they want civil rights. Environmental responsibility, peace, the treatment of workers of civil rights. That makes ethical oil. And if you go around the world and look at where oil comes from, I mean, I don't know what God was thinking of when he was handing out this stuff, but he gave it to all the world's bastards. I mean, Iran, Iraq, Qatar, Russia, Nigeria, Venezuela. What is going on? Why do all the worst places in the world have oil? Well, it's not quite true, because the UK has oil and gas itself. It just won't produce it. America is, under Trump, is producing a lot of it, but under Joe Biden, he tried to stop it. I put it to you that oil and gas produced in Canada, the United States, Norway, and the UK, and that's just about it, are the fair trade coffee of the world's oil and gas industry. And listen, Steve, one day we'll discover the fantasy fuel of the future that's perfect in every way, other than it doesn't exist. You know, in the movie Avatar, they called it unobtainium. In Star Trek, they called it dilithium crystals. That's science fiction. As far as the eye can see into the future, we will need oil and gas. Consumption and production are only going to grow. So what I would say to these morally preening leftists is, you're going to fill up your car with gas from somewhere. The only question is it ethical oil made in the West under our Western liberal standards, or are you bringing it in from Qatar and averting your eyes? You know, Steve, on almost everything we buy in the store, there's country of origin labeling, right? And a lot of our stuff is made in China, and I think that gives people some heartache, because China's an authoritarian place. But we don't label the petrol, as the Brits would say, at the pump, do we? You don't know where your petrol is coming from. I bet if there were two gas pumps right next to each other, and one said made from ethical oil in the North Sea, or made from ethical oil fracked right here in Britain, and the other said Saudi oil or Qatari oil, and you're a British consumer, which one would you choose? You might even pay premium for the ethical oil. You know, people pay a little more for fair trade coffee. I think that we have to grow up a little bit and realize we're going to need fossil fuels for the foreseeable future. Every barrel of oil that's produced in Canada, United States, Norway, the UK, is one fewer barrels that some Saudi prince or Qatari terrorist or Russian, warmonger will not sell. It behooves us to produce as much oil and gas as we possibly can to displace the conflict oil and gas. I would be deeply embarrassed if I was a Brit buying my natural gas from Qatar, maybe the worst country in the world when it comes to terror.
You talked about Mark Carney potentially winning the election in Canada, but in the United States, Donald Trump won the election fairly recently. Can you talk a bit about how his energy policies differ from those in Britain and Canada?
Well, there's that slogan which they love to use in the States, drill, baby, drill. And they're doing it in the Gulf of Mexico, or as Trump now calls it, the Gulf of America. In Alaska, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, Democrats put that off limits to drilling. Republicans love to drill there. Pipelines. The very first act that Joe Biden did when he was on his inauguration day after he won his term, the very first thing he did was cancel the Keystone XL pipeline, which would have brought 800,000 barrels a day down from Canada. That bizarrely was the first thing Joe Biden canceled. Donald Trump has talked about reviving that pipeline. America, this is hard to believe, Steve, but America is actually now a net exporter of energy. That's unthinkable a generation ago when America was at the mercy of OPEC countries. I just wrote a book, don't mind me mentioning it. It's called Deal of the Century, the America First Plan for Canada's Oil Sands. And I say America should go even deeper, and I think Trump would be open to this. Right now, Canada, mainly Alberta, the oil-producing province, ships about 4 million barrels a day down to the States, which is a lot of oil. But Alberta could double its output, and in doing so, displace pretty much all other OPEC sources of oil for America. So it would just be America burning its own oil and filling the gap from Canada. There's so much oil in Canada, in the oil sands, that even if you doubled production, it would last for 50 years. There's 170 billion barrels. At today's prices, that's a $13 trillion deal. So if you frame it like a real estate deal, like buying Greenland or something. But the thing is, Trump already has the contract in place. It's a free trade deal called the USMCA, and there's a side letter to it that gives America preferential access to Canadian oil. So he doesn't have to annex anything. He doesn't have to make Canada the 51st state. He can just back up the truck and say, give me all your oil. And not only would that free America from conflict oil, it would give Canada some cash to rebuild our military with. But here's the big win for the United States. If they drill and frack and buy Canadian oil sands and get off the foreign oil, well, all of a sudden the U.S. military does not have to have 100 bases in the Middle East. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, which costs about $50 billion a year, doesn't have to patrol the Persian Gulf sea lanes. Why is America, with its blood and treasure, basically being the Brinks truck for the Saudis? Like, if you transpose the cost that the Pentagon spends in patrolling the Persian Gulf sea lanes onto Persian Gulf oil that America takes every year, it's over $100 a barrel subsidy. Like, the U.S. spends $50 billion keeping Saudi oil safe. Now, maybe America would do that anyways as a gift to the world, or maybe, for whatever reason, maybe America still wants to play global cop. That's up to them. But they wouldn't at least be compelled to patrol the Persian Gulf anymore because they'd get all their oil and gas from home. And Canadians, spend that money on happy things, not on terrorism.
I'm sure Canada would love the money for their welfare state as well as the military. Can you just, whilst I've got you, one more question. Can you comment on the latest between Trump and Canada? Obviously, he's threatening these tariffs. Now, by the time this video goes out, I'm not sure, I think tomorrow is the big day, the Liberation Day, as Trump calls it, where he's going to impose a lot of tariffs around the world. What's your view on this trade war between Canada and the US?
Well, Canada and the U.S. have a lot of free trade right now, including, I mentioned, in oil and gas. And tariffs don't really work on oil and gas because I can understand you put a tariff on a Honda plant in Mexico. They're going to relocate their factory to America, to sell cars in America. You can do that. But you can't relocate the oil sands from Canada or from Qatar, for that matter. So tariffs on energy don't work the same way, at least for oil. All that would do is immediately put an import tax, really, on oil that goes to U.S. refineries. So I don't think it makes sense from an America First point of view to tariff the oil. Tariffs don't work on Canadian oil. Obviously, I don't want tariffs put on other Canadian products either. Trump says that Canada is subsidized by America. It's true militarily. It absolutely is. And that's something we should fix as Canadians. Trump says that we don't patrol the border properly for illegal migrants and illegal drugs. And he's right there again. And we should do it for our own sake. Trump says that we have a trade surplus with him, but again, it's that oil. There are a few trade irritants that we should address. Canadian dairy and poultry cartels double the price of those food products for Canadians, and we keep out American competitors. Trump doesn't like that. Trump doesn't like the fact that you can't get a mortgage from a Canadian bank, or an American bank in Canada. And I think Canadians would love the competition. So if you take away some of the more incendiary rhetoric, I think what Trump is saying can be worked with. I think that Canada and the U.S. have a great trade relationship. It's actually, I think, the largest two-way trading relationship in the world. And I think Trump has managed to get the attention of Canadian politicians. But I should tell you, by talking about annexing Canada as the 51st state, he's really put a lot of energy into the left-wing parties who have discovered a fake nationalism now. The conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, was running on a populist nationalism for the last 2 years, and he had a 20-point lead. Now it's the left-wing parties, one of them led by Mark Carney, that are wrapping themselves in the flag, which is quite something for Mark Carney. He's got 3 passports. He hasn't lived in Canada in a decade. He's up to his eyeballs with China. And he's positioning himself as Captain Canada to save us from Trump's annexation. And it seems to be working in the polls. So I'm more worried about that. I think the tariffs will pass. But if, God forbid, if Mark Carney's elected, that would be as bad as Keir Starmer being elected in the UK.